Welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from wherever you may hail. Thanks so much for joining us, and a very special welcome, as always, to our members and our CFCS professionals who are tuning in. We have over 1,100, I think, folks that are signed up for this webinar. Wow, this is amazing. Thank you. It highlights the importance of the topic we're exploring today, uncovering evidence of money laundering with OSINT and network visualization. There are tons of tips and tricks and new ways of digging into open source intelligence when working on our fin crime investigations. Today's session is going to guide you in how to navigate the literal sea of information that's out there and that exists on the interwebs. I hear they have that on computers these days, guys. I'm pleased to be joined by two gentlemen who are tops in their field, whom I'm going to introduce in just a moment. But before I do that, I need to briefly introduce myself. I am Erin O'Loughlin, Senior Director of Training for the Association and host and moderator for this session. I also need to talk to you about who we are. You may have just logged in because you're friends with these guys. I think they got a lot of friends. And if you don't know us, I'm going to go ahead and let you know who we are. For those of you who have not run into us before, we are a professional association. We exist to serve you, the community of financial crime prevention and detection specialists, whatever form that may take. We also do customized training. What makes us unique is that we cover the full range of financial crime threats: money laundering, fraud, cybercrime, sanctions, terrorist financing, which is my bread and butter and always has been, and much more. And not just provide information on a bunch of different topics, but aim to help you achieve better results through a broader, more comprehensive approach to fighting fin crime. All right, let's move this slide. There we go. We offer membership. It includes news and analysis, members-only webinars, and access to extensive archives of webinars and training content. We deliver virtual and eventually live events, most notably our Crypto Compliance Symposium live in-person event, finally, in San Francisco on July 21st. If you're interested in learning more about crypto compliance and in-person networking, hit me up, let me know, and I'll guide you to the right people to get you a ticket. We also have growing chapter presence around the world. Just a few of them are highlighted here. I urge you to visit our website and learn more about the ways you can get involved. My colleague Kata Martinez and I are diligently working on a new Dallas-Fort Worth chapter. So if you are in an area that doesn't have a chapter for ACFCS, hit me up, let me know, and let us get going on starting one for you. We also administer the CFCS, or the otherwise known as Certified Financial Crime Specialist credential. I'll say that again slower because I've had a lot of coffee. The Certified Financial Crime Specialist credential, really the only certification out there that covers the full spectrum of financial crime risk. You got your money laundering over here, you got your fraud over here. Fantastic. In the middle is where we lie. CFCS, we bring in both money laundering and fraud at the same time and get you tested on it. Right. Now, a couple of quick tips on troubleshooting suggestions. This is a browser-based webinar platform. So first step, if you run into any problems, refresh your browser. I know I sound like an IT guy when I say that. If that doesn't work, please try closing out the session and rejoining using the same link. Although I will say I love the IT folks, can't live without them. Attendees generally report the best results on Chrome or Firefox, so you can also try switching to one of those if you're not using them. The session is being recorded. So the recording and the slides and a certificate of participation will be available to ACFCS members only. So if you're not a member, let us know. You can get this stuff within 3 business days of the presentation. Be on the lookout for an email when it's posted. If you're not an ACFCS member and want to receive the deck, you'll need to opt in to be contacted. There's going to be a poll question at the end of the session. Go ahead and respond to that if you haven't already opted in during registration. That's the way you can do it. All right. Now, without further ado, I'm really excited to introduce our speakers for this session. I need to introduce Jean Villedieu, co-founder of Linkurious, and Friedrich Lindenberg, founder of Open Sanctions. Welcome, folks. While I throw up a poll before we get going on their backgrounds, if you're not looking at your screen, go ahead and look at your screen. There's a poll that has been thrown up, and then we're going to talk about our speakers' backgrounds. What are the top 3 challenges for your organization in terms of AML, financial crime detection and investigation? While our attendees are answering the question, Jean, tell us a little about yourself. What makes you excited to be here? How did you get into this industry?
Sure. So my name is Jean. I'm one of the co-founders of Linkurious, and I'm super excited about connecting with this great organization and lots of financial crime professionals. So today we are going to be covering open source intelligence and network visualization.
Fantastic. Thank you for being here so much. Friedrich, tell us a little about yourself. What's your background? What gets you excited about being here as well?
Well, my name is Friedrich. I've been working for the last 10 years or so with investigative journalists on kind of big cross-border collaborative projects. And that got me really interested in financial crime as sort of a recurring theme and something that's quite interesting to dig into. And so now I'm working on an open resource that people can use to do that better.
See, I'm excited about that because OSINT is kind of a big thing for me as well. I teach on it. I've given, back in May, I gave an OSINT presentation at 2 different conferences. But the thing that excites me about this presentation and what you two are going to talk about is the OSINT marrying up with the network visualization. I'm real excited to see what you have to say about that because I'm not a tech person. Not a lot of our folks online are really tech people. They're fin crime, they're compliance, they're legal. They really want to know how you're going to marry these two together. And that's really what's jazzing me up about this. I have a question from Chad. What is the preferred contact info for starting a chapter? I will write to you, Chad, about starting a chapter. Thank you so much for asking that question. We have about almost 50% of our attendees answering the poll question. I'm going to go ahead and push it, John. What do you think? And we'll look at the poll questions and then you take it away.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay. Check this out. We have 46% say adapting to or evolving criminal typologies. 55, wow, detecting complex criminal schemes and networks. Yeah, I would agree with that one. That would be probably what I would have chosen too. Handling increasing volume of alerts. Oh, I hated that when I was working all these alerts. That drove me insane. False positives too. That drives me absolutely up the wall. And yeah, I didn't even see, I forgot, we put in false positives. Conducting time-efficient investigations. That's also another one. If you can give any tips and tricks on time-efficient, and I know where this one comes from too, because being an AML investigator for as many years as I have, in a lot of the bigger companies, they have a very much of a do it now, your quota. So if once we give some tips, I know you're going to have that in your toolbox here, have some tips on how to better effectively manage their time as well. That's going to be a big one. These are really evenly split. This is very interesting. What do you think, John?
What's interesting to me is that I think there's a bit of a trade-off between conducting time-efficient investigations and fighting back against complex criminal schemes and networks. And it goes very well with today's topic, where we are going to talk about doing this sort of investigations and bringing into the equation open source intelligence, which on the face of it, can seem like it's going to help with more complex schemes, but at the cost of adding complexity and time. Hopefully, we'll be able to show that this trade-off is not as big as one could think.
Absolutely. Thanks. What do you think, Friedrich?
Well, I'm interested in people adapting to new criminal topologies, but it's really a race of innovation between them and us, those who are trying to kind of come up with better ways of stealing and hiding money, and those who are trying to kind of keep track of it in real time.
Absolutely. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and push this to the agenda. Jean, take it away. What are we going to look at today? So
we have prepared the following agenda for today. So first, we'll talk about open data and financial crime investigations, lay some concepts, some basic ground facts. Then we'll talk about the challenges of open data. And for that, we are going to take one example. We will be focusing on sanctions lists. After that, we'll talk about the approach that we recommend to tackle this challenge, which is building a financial crime knowledge graph. After that, we will talk a little bit about a case study, an OSINT rated case study, which is the Russian laundromat. And then we'll do a demo to show all of this in practice. So that's for today's agenda. And with this, let's get started. So first, let's talk about open source intelligence and financial crime investigations. As a regulated institution or a government agency, there's only so much that your internal data can tell you about your clients, the transactions that you are concerned with. And you need to bring over information, external data, to really assess the riskiness of these entities. And there's a ton of open data sources out there, such as company registries or sanctions lists that can help identify money laundering, fraud, terrorism, and other risks. And of course, if as a government agency or a regulated institution, you ignore these new data sources, you take huge risks. So now let's talk a little bit about a concrete example of dealing with open source intelligence, and we will be focusing on sanctions list. So what's interesting here is that in theory, this data is readily accessible online and for free in most cases. One such example would be the OFAC sanctions list, probably the most relevant data source for this topic. You can use Google, and in a couple of seconds, you will be connected to this piece of information, and you will be able to search and get some information about whether an entity is on the OFAC sanctions list or not. The thing is that in practice, there are hundreds of potential data sources if you are interested in sanctions, and each of these data sources commits with its own format, let's say. So in practice, looking up a name in a single data source, that's easy. But when you want to consolidate all of these data sources and continuously integrate them into your investigation processes, then that's a completely different ballgame. And it can get really complex really fast. And of course, this is just one example of one type of information. But there are lots of other data sources and sources of intelligence that are out there. For example, you may be interested in companies, and then the beneficial ownership data, which is also oftentimes open source, can be super relevant for you in your investigations. Maybe you have clients that are dealing with crypto assets, and here you have also a lot of information about these that's accessible online. You can also find information about IP addresses, phone numbers, places online. Just like you can, go into social media platforms to learn more about your clients if you want. So there's really a lot of information out there that you can leverage if you want to improve your investigation processes. But how to do that in practice? I mean, when you look at it, there's a few options, and they're not really satisfying, let's say. The first one that we can think of is ad hoc OSINT investigations. On a one-off basis, leverage all the relevant OSINT data sources that can make sense to conduct long and complex research. This can be very time-consuming, and it requires lots of advanced skills. Just to illustrate this point, for example, you have this outfit, this NGO called Bedding Cat, and on a regular basis, they publish investigations, and they've been, for example, able to deconstruct how the Russian FSB conducted a poisoning operation in the UK. And they can come up with all sort of small details, very precise, and they leverage a ton of open source intelligence. And the end result is very impressive. But it's not something that you can scale across millions of clients. So there's this approach. Another option is solutions, commercial solutions that are there and that are focused on a single type of data or a single use case. For example, you can, buy access to sanctions scanning platform among others. This is going to be very effective for this one use case, but it can create silos, because at the end of the day, if you are interested in financial crime, you don't just care about sanctions screening in isolation. You are looking at a much broader picture. So you need potentially to patch together different point solutions to get to a place where you are addressing the full scope of the problem. And finally, if you are, for example, a spy agency, you can, sort of buy your way out of this issue and spend, tens, hundreds of millions of dollars, and create something very comprehensive, I guess. So these are, some of the potential options that can be, that you can think of when you are thinking about integrating open source intelligence into your investigation process. 3 options, and not a lot of them that are very exciting, I would say. So that's why I want to introduce something else, a different approach. And today we are going to demonstrate that. That's an approach that's more modular and pragmatic. And we are calling it building a financial crime knowledge graph. So what does it mean? It means unifying the relevant data sources into a single network of entities and relationships. And within this network, you can see what's the context surrounding a client or a transaction, no matter whether the relevant data is internal or external. The knowledge graph can act as a source of truth that can reveal new insights. For example, you can reveal that a client, seemingly with a normal client, is actually connected to someone who is a bad actor. It can also accelerate investigations because instead of opening 10 tabs to understand the context around the client, you can quickly see that as a graph, as a network. And then it can increase the confidence in your decisions. You have, the comfort of knowing that no stones have been left unturned because you have all the relevant information in front of you readily available. This knowledge graph can provide relevant context to all investigations and be extended via other apps and via other data sources. So maybe this sounds too good to be true. So hopefully we'll be able to show today how an ecosystem of tools around graph analytics, open source intelligence, and entity resolution can make this a concrete reality. So this is going to be, Frederic and I jobs today.
So Jean, can I just go back real quick? I'm going to jump in here real fast. I love this graph here. I just want to clarify for our audience, this middle blue button in the middle between your blue gentleman and the red gentleman, is that the entity in which these two folks are connected, and that's the entity to which they are connected by?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so here you're looking at a seemingly normal client, and maybe you look only at let's say the internal data about that client, and you see that the client is connected to an order, a transaction, a credit card. And this information, when you look at that, doesn't tell you, anything that's bad about the client. But when you combine that with other data points, and you're able, and some of them coming from open source intelligence, you see that indirectly the client is connected to another fraudster or to someone who is on sanctions list. And all of a sudden, it really changes your perspective on the situation, and you are able to uncover a risk that would otherwise have gone unnoticed.
What is the difference between the blue lines that you have up at the top and the tan lines on the bottom? This
sort of blue line, it's about highlighting what's the shortest path, what is connecting the person on the left and the person on the right.
That's fantastic, because as an investigator myself, I would see, honestly, I'd see 1, 2, 3 steps before you get to someone in the middle, but they're not necessarily steps, right? Because that's a box, one is a dollar sign, and the other is a card. So that's not necessarily 3 layers of people, right? Because if there's 3 layers of people, that person is still pretty innocent. But these are three different ways in which they're touching the middle entity.
Exactly, and you do need to have some human intelligence here involved in the process of making sense of the data, because as you were saying, maybe as an expert, that at middle point, maybe it's not relevant, or maybe on the contrary, that it's rare to have 2 persons that are connected across that type of path, and visualizing and having someone looking at this data can drive sort of the the last mile of the investigation, where we decide, whether there's something fishy going on or not.
Have you heard of a game that people in the U.S. play called 6 Degrees to Kevin Bacon?
Yep. I'm aware of that.
And that's kind of what I see here. Like, how many degrees is it? And that's where the human analysis comes in, right? To say, now, is this person really suspicious? Or is it like a 6 degrees to Kevin Bacon type thing? Or 6 degrees to Vladimir Putin? Yes, that's a good one. Readers, 6 degrees to Vladimir Putin. Let's figure out for the human analysis, because tech isn't always good. It's not going to take over right now. It will probably in a couple generations. But as long as we're still humans and have our jobs, we can look at this and analyze it ourselves, is what you're saying, correct?
Yeah, and I love what you're saying. I mean, I think it's an important idea to understand that, that some of these connections, I mean, if you don't have access to these connections, you're at risk of missing some critical piece of knowledge. Maybe you're dealing with someone, and that person is actually, Vladimir Putin's, best friend or something like that. You would hate, to have missed that critical bit of knowledge. But sometimes the connections can be non-relevant. So that's why it's important to both have information about the context and the connections between your clients, the transactions, and the rest of the world, but also have a person that can look at that to make informed decisions. And obviously, part of this process can be automated. You can have notifications when there are certain types of connections that pop up in the data. And then that's where the human intelligence comes into play, and decides whether something fishy is going on or not.
That's fantastic. Is this the network visualization that you refer to in the title, or are we getting into that with Friedrich?
It's the type of network visualization that we are referring to in the title. Correct.
This is really cool. I would have liked something like this when I was investigating, but I don't want to take time away from Friedrich. So we're going to go ahead and do our second poll. All right, folks, if you are doing 2 or 3 or 4 things at a time, as we all are in work from home environment, go ahead and turn to your screen. We are doing the second poll if you'd like to participate. Does your organization already leverage graph technology? Now, I like that you guys throw this question in, and I was reading this last night because this is a really good one. Having worked in some major financial institutions as well as a crypto exchange company, and you brought this point up in one of your previous slides, John. A lot of these companies, and I'm not gonna call them out specifically, but they will not invest in OSINT tools. It's a very hard sell. What kinds of things? Obviously, you're here on a webinar with us. We're getting the platform out. More and more people are coming to these OSINT presentations. As we can see, 1,200 people signed up for this one. This is fantastic. We want to know more. We need to get this kind of information in. Are you seeing much more of a demand for it? Are they actually buying this stuff up? I would like to know, because I've been out for over a year now. And if companies are eating this technology up, I would love to know that.
I think maybe in the past there was this perception that I was referring to, that maybe it's ready for high-end, super sophisticated investigations, that it makes sense to bring into the analysis a lot of open source intelligence, but it's tough to apply that at scale. I think it used to be the perception, but now there's more and more demand, appetite for doing this. And what we want to showcase with Friedrich today is that it's actually doable without breaking the bank, without this becoming a nightmare of a project. And hopefully we'll be able to talk more about that later on.
Yes, I don't want to steal Friedrich's thunder. Are you seeing the same kind of appetite growing, Friedrich, the need to try and navigate the sea of information that's out there? It just seems like it's so much, and how executives are listening or not listening to the tools that are needed.
Yeah, I think everyone is drowning in the amount of information that's available to the public right now. And in a way, having that information is fantastic, right? That gives us transparency, that gives us the means to piece together those 6 degrees to Vladimir Putin. But then the question really becomes, how do we actually get it to a place, all that data, where we can ask questions and get the answers that we need in order to conduct business.
Exactly. Technology is moving so fast, and banks, financial institutions, it's hard to keep up. It really is. And I'm going to defend them a little bit saying that, because with the regulations, technology isn't under the same regulations and the same microscope as they are. So it is tough. So getting folks like you out there to say, this is what you need, this is very important. We have 53% of our attendees that have answered. I'm going to go ahead and push. We've got over half. That's good. Ooh, 32% say that they do. 39, no. I was actually expecting no to be a lot bigger. So that speaks to the appetite of which I brought up. What do you guys think?
Yeah, very interesting. But I would be curious, to understand. I'm guessing that there are a lot of different situations beyond that. Yes, maybe we're talking about, sort of, a small part of the investigation that leverages open source intelligence. Maybe it's, could be as simple as I'm conducting a few Google search on a suspicious client as part of the process. So I'm curious about that. But the numbers are a bit surprising, which is awesome.
Yeah. Okay, I don't want to step on Friedrich's toes. Do we move on to the next slide, or is Friedrich going to take over for his demo?
Nothing. Standing over to John now.
Okay.
Yeah, we can move to the next slide.
All right, there you go.
Thanks. So we have talked about building a financial crime knowledge graph. Now let's talk a little bit about how to do that. I'm going to talk about 4 steps. Right, I'm going to do a bit of an overview, and then later on we'll talk more in details about those different steps. So first, it starts with collecting information, open source information about sanctions and politically exposed persons. So information about sanctions entities, about politically exposed persons, information of criminal interests, and related companies. Then the idea is to create a knowledge, financial crime knowledge graph based on that. So the data from the various sources is imported into a single graph database where entities are represented as nodes and edges. And then you can integrate your data into the graph. So think, KYC information about transactions. It can also be, information about the scoring of people and transactions coming from existing alert systems. And there are various tools out there for entity resolution, the process of identifying, how the external data and internal data are connected. Or, for example, John Smith from data source A and John D. Smith from data source B are one and the same or not. So there are, some tools for that and some dedicated libraries. And finally, the idea is to, leverage this information. And you can then detect insights even in this financial crime knowledge graph. So you can then use this relevant context for quick and accurate decisions. So that's for a bit of an overview. And of course, there are tools out there to do all of this, and we are going to focus on that today. When it comes to open source intelligence, we will discuss about open sanctions and how we can provide coverage for these data sources. In terms of storing graph data, there are graph databases out there such as Neo4j or HDB that can help out, just like tools like Tamer and Senzing can help with the entity resolution process. And finally, during the demo, we'll showcase Linker Enterprise, which is our investigation platform that is purpose-built for making sense of large, complex knowledge graphs. So that's it for an overview. There are a few points that I want to highlight here. A key insight that Frederick and I are, want to convey, I guess, in today's presentation is that doing this, which may sound a bit daunting, is not nearly as difficult as you might think. A few years ago, the various tools that we are seeing here were not necessarily available on the market, but today they are, and it means that it becomes much easier to build this financial crime knowledge graph. Another thing that I want to highlight is that this approach gives you a lot of flexibility in terms of the tools that you are using, in terms of the data that you can incorporate. But of course, it's not as easy as one single monolithic solution focused on one use case or one single data source. And then the key around this approach is to be pragmatic, start small, and iterate to improve. For example, in just 1 or 2 months, you can have your internal data available for analysts in a knowledge graph, and you can then progressively incorporate external data sources. Okay, so moving on.
Okay, we have our third and final poll. If you're not looking at your screen, if you're doing other things and listening, that's great too. If you want to participate, go ahead, turn to your screen. Do you use OSINT in your AML financial crime investigations? Often, sometimes, rarely, or never. Ooh, I don't want to hear the never. Oh, that scares me. Anyway, I'm going to move on to that one. We have a good question from Sandeep. I'm going to throw to either of you, Jean or Friedrich. Sandeep asks, if I have the external information, how difficult is it to build the knowledge graph for a non-technical person?
It depends on the type of data. If we're talking about structured data and one single data source, for example, it can be just a matter of hours to have something up and running. At the other end of the spectrum, if we're talking about multiple external data sources and mixing that with some internal data, then it's more complicated. But just to give you a bit of a reference, the knowledge graph approach that we are going to highlight, it's something that can be done by an organization with an IT team in something like 6 months. You can have something up and running in production. Just to give some numbers, I guess.
So with the right training, right? Go ahead, Friedrich.
I would add that there's not an investigator or analyst in the world who doesn't have a knowledge graph, right? The question is just about, A, can we get it out of our heads and out of our notebooks and into the realm of actually being a digital artifact? And B, can we enrich it with bulk data that exists and that we can use to dive deeper, right? So in a way, like, everyone starts small. I know people who make knowledge graphs in PowerPoint and just kind of have these intricate networks of activity and insight there. And so I think kind of the question is more about scaling up from that and going into bringing in bulk data, bringing in data that's sanctions data, beneficial ownership, activity data, procurement data, all these different sources that really help to contextualize. And I think there's more and more tools available that allow you to kind of go further into building that in a semi-technical way, or building that with a little bit of engineering help, and essentially growing the level of insight. But really the starting point has to be what questions are we trying to ask, and what data do we need to bring together in order to ask these questions, and then work backwards from there towards kind of not trying to build too complicated an engineering effort.
I love that, Friedrich. I actually felt like I was one step away, just one step shy from getting on a wall and putting the red felt string from pictures to pictures. You see in movies that people do sometimes. It was crazy for me. Like, where did I get this? How am I going to put this down into a narrative for law enforcement? So that's a really good point you brought up. Thank you. We have 51% of our attendees that have answered. We're going to go ahead and push to the answers here. Often, never. 12%. Never. 10% is rarely. Wow. What do you guys think? What do you think, Friedrich, about these answers?
Well, I mean, everybody does it. The question is just whether A, you're allowed, or B, you even qualify all the things that you do every day as being OSINT research, right? Even just going to the court system in your own country and looking up other cases on this individual or on this company, to me, that already qualifies as OSINT research.
Good point. What about you, Jean?
Yeah, I'm pleased to see that indeed there are some folks that are doing that often. Seems to be the majority, so that's great.
And for those of you who answered never, please become members. Look at our OSINT training that we have, or reach out to any three of us that are on this platform right now. We'd love to talk to you about it. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and go to the next slide. Whose slide is that?
Right, so let's actually try and build our own little knowledge graph. And I want to use a motivating example here, which is from my work working with journalists with a group called the OSINT, the Organized Crime Protection Reporting Project, where we spend a lot of time digging into the laundromats. And what the laundromats are is they're these financial systems that are used to funnel very large amounts of money out of different countries into the Western banking system. So, for example, we invested one network called the Russian Laundromat that took $20 billion US dollars out of mostly Russia into the European financial system. And then we also investigated a second system called the Azerbaijani Laundromat that moved $2.9 billion, mostly from Azerbaijan, into the Baltics, and then from there into the rest of the European and global financial system. And so if you're looking at that as a purely technical problem, what you're really facing is you have banking transactions, right? So you're looking at this transactional data and they're all mixed up, right? So you have material in there that's trade related, people just buying a new fridge for a supermarket in Moscow and not wanting to use the formal banking, wanting to use the proper customs procedure for that. But then you also have the downright criminal, right? You have kickbacks, you have payments to politicians in Europe. In particular, with the Azerbaijani system, what we saw was a lot of payments being made to members of the Parliamentary Assembly of Europe, who were essentially voting there on adopting measures regarding the human rights record of Azerbaijan. And so the question then becomes, how do we actually find the interesting bits of activity in those vast systems, right? You've got 2 million banking transactions. How do you find the 20, 30 that you're going to write a story about? And that's where you need those, what I would call contrast material, right? Maybe you know this from a medical procedure where the doctor goes and injects you with a contrast material, and that makes really the activity visible that's most of interest to you. And so to me, that's always kind of sanctions and data on politically exposed persons, or PEPs, where you really have an immediate investigative interest if you find an entity that's sanctioned or linked at least to a politician. But really, most of the time, you don't find that direct link, right? Going straight from a payment to one of those individuals or entities. So what you need is that intermediate buffer of information. You need beneficial ownership information. You need those kind of business relationships between companies in order to kind of make those missing steps between a financial crime and kind of corrupt activity of decision makers really visible. And that's, maybe you can move forward. That's how I got really interested in collecting data on these persons of interest. So for the last year, I've been working on this project called Open Sanctions, where we're basically trying to create an open source, openly accessible database of sanctioned entities, of politically exposed persons, and trying to make that as easily accessible. Obviously, there is kind of fantastic commercial products that provide that data, but the annual license fee for something like that is equivalent to the operating budget of a nonprofit newsroom in a small Central European country. And so what we're trying to do is make this open source, which means that both the code that's used to generate the data, but also the data itself is freely available and can be reused by anyone. So it's really inviting people also to experiment with this data and to use it more creatively as a sort of building block in trying to try out new investigative approaches. Yeah, the idea there is to kind of really create a commons where people have this data easily at their fingertips, can use it for whatever they can think of, can put it together with other data sets, as we're going to show in a moment. So for example, today we're going to put it together with a number of different data sets, the laundromat data, but also data from ICIJ's offshore leaks database, which documents kind of many of the business relationships from the Panama Papers and Paradise Papers, but also with, for example, Glyph, which is a a database that many of you might know, that's kind of an artifact of the issuing of legal entity identifiers. In order to make this sustainable, we do ask that commercial reusers basically take a stake in the maintenance and acquire a commercial use license. But if you're working in government or if you're working in an investigative organization that's in public interest, then this is guaranteed to be free forever. So that's basically the idea behind open sanctions. Now, going forward into how to build a graph, I'm going to hand it back to Jean for a second.
Sure. So we have seen how to get access to this critical information via open sanctions. Now we are going to talk a little bit about how to create the financial crime knowledge graph. So storing data as a graph of nodes and edges helps facilitate complex investigations and integrate other data sources. The open sanctions data that Frederick was mentioning is accessible in a graph format, and it can be stored in graph databases such as Neo4j, which is an open source graph database. Setting up a graph database and integrating open sanctions in that is a matter of days for a graph specialist that knows about graph databases such as Neo4j. So this would be sort of the second step of the journey. After that comes the where we need to integrate your data into the graph, adding other external data sources, and your internal data can help create a single knowledge graph. So this is a complex process. It's never perfect, the end results. But what's interesting to note here is that there are multiple tools for entity resolution that can help, once again, identify how, the information from data source A and data B overlap to make sure that there are no duplicates that are created when the two data sources are merged. Among these tools, we can mention Sensing or Timer. Some of them are low code, so fairly accessible, including to non-technical users. And then there are, for the data scientists out there, there are also specialized libraries. One thing that I would like to stress is that, the important part here is about being pragmatic and being willing, I guess, to start with something imperfect that then continuously improves. You can add, more data sources. You can fine-tune the ability to do entity resolution, to get, to very strong place. But don't underestimate the value of, just getting started in the first place. And finally, at the end of the process, then comes the part where we try to investigate the data. Really, like in all data projects, the bulk of the effort it comes when you're preparing and creating the data, and the actual part where you want to make sense of it it's usually easier. At Linkers, we have built a software for this specific part. It's called Linkers Enterprise. It's an investigation platform, and it leverages graph analytics to reveal hidden connections and uncover new insights. You can connect Linkers Enterprise to your knowledge graph, and then you can very quickly detect suspicious patterns or visually conduct investigations. You can do that, with small data sets in the tens of thousands of entities, or with graphs of billions of nodes and relationships. Something else that's important is that Linkers Enterprise can connect to third-party services to integrate OSINT sources that don't really fit in the knowledge graph. If, for example, you can have access, online to information about domain names, about emails, but you don't necessarily have a way to download a fully structured copy of this information and integrate that in your knowledge graph. And even if you had a way to do that, maybe it wouldn't make sense to do it anyways. So within Linkers Enterprise, you can quickly pivot from the graph that you have and to other systems. And finally, this software is used on a daily basis by teams of investigators at the ICIJ. This is the the organization behind the Panama Papers, but also at Zurich Insurance, Wells Fargo, or the Indian tax agency. So we have talked a little bit about the theory, I would say, of how to build a financial crime knowledge graph. Now I want to look at a practical example. I'm going to talk about a project called Open Screening. So it's a project that Linkurious and Open Sanctions have partnered on. We'll do a bit of a demo, but first, what is Open Screening? It's really a search engine where you can look up entities of interest and quickly see everything that they're connected to conduct investigations and uncover suspicious activities or potential risks. This is a dataset that combines 180,000 persons, 20,000 sanctions entities, 800,000 companies in a graph of more than 2 million nodes and more than 3 million relationships. Overall, I think it integrates more than 50 data sources into one single platform that you can use for free if you visit linkurious.com. So that's it for a bit of an introduction to Open Screening. And with this, I'm going to leave it to Frederic for a demo.
Wonderful. I think one thing that I also want to mention about what we're doing is that the recipe for building Open Screening is actually also an open source artifact. So basically, we published also the code for how to take all of these data sets, smash them together, and come up with your own kind of graph that you can add your own information to. And so this is kind of an invitation to play and remix. And I also want to emphasize just like how much of this exercise is about imperfection. What you're about to see is very much kind of an experiment that's meant to be targeted at an investigator trying to find connectivity. For example, in the Q&A, Nabil Masri just asked, to what extent can open source information be misleading? Is it reliable enough to build an AML case around it? And I think a lot of what we're going to talk about right now deals with vast amounts of uncertainty of the information. And so it's really about kind of trying to use the technology to build hypotheses, but then also using it to dive deeper and then pan out these hypotheses and discard the ones that are not provable, but then really kind of build the case around the ones that can carry forward. So you might already have seen my screen. We're at the most obvious place in the universe right now. We're looking at Mr. Putin. And can I just have confirmation that we're seeing my screen?
I can only see the pie graph. What looks like the pie graph with the blue and red and the green.
So let's click on the pie graph. The pie graph turns out to be a single lost soul node. So I've clicked on him, and we can see here. This is a legal entity, meaning it's kind of a thing that can do business. It's a person, it's a politician, it's a sanctioned entity following the events of February, March, and April. And also for historical reasons, Mr. Putin in our database is tagged as a spy. We can see here some more details about him, and so on and so on. So now what I want to do is I want to just kind of highlight that this is kind of showing you one database that contains information from a sanctions database and from a PEPs database, but it's also already containing for example, the Panama Papers and offshore leaks data. So I'm gonna press this button, which says link to an offshore company. And what this does is basically it's running a preset query that's saying, hey, can you find from the current entity a path that takes it to a connection with a company that's part of the offshore leaks database. So if we do this, then it'll think for a second and find essentially the first connections that it can make. And you can see here, bam, it's found a lot of different connections to the to offshore leaks, to the Panama Papers, right? So for example, here we've got Igor Putin, the cousin of Vladimir Putin. Over here, we've got the whole Rotenberg tribe, who are a group of friends of the Russian president and also construction magnates. And we have a number of other connections as well. What I want to kind of attract your attention to right now is that you have different types of nodes here. So for example, in this system, Yellow means it's a close associate, so it's someone who's linked to a sanctioned individual, is to a politician. And red means it's a sanctioned entity. But there's these blue nodes, and what these blue nodes are is they're just names. So we've basically taken all of the names of all the actors in these data sets and turned them into nodes upon themselves, right? So what it's saying is basically, hey, there's an entity in this database in Open Sanctions called Igor Putin, and there's also another entity over here called Igor Putin in the Panama Papers. And we're not making any judgment quite yet about whether this is the same person. So we're not actually making that decision. But we are kind of highlighting, hey, if this were true, if that Igor Putin were the same Igor Putin as the one that we have in our reference data, then there would be an interesting company to look at. So, for example, here we have Paulo Media Corporation, that is a company that reporting has actually shown is owned by Igor Putin. And we also have other links here. So, for example, here we have Sergei Ivanov as a possible link. And that obviously is an extremely generic name, right? So here we have a lot more legwork proving that this is actually the same entity as the one that's linked to Vladimir Putin. So already we have this graph that's kind of not talking only about, okay, there is a connectivity, but it's also talking about the uncertainty in what we have, right? So we have connections here that are entirely tentative and that are basically made on the premise that we're all grown-ups here and that we're not going to run and claim something without having done further research. So this is just kind of a very high-level graph. I want to maybe start off with a different entity here. So this one here I found in the Azerbaijani laundromat, and it's an entity that's just called Modiar in the data. And it caught my eye because it sounded very Lord of the Rings, right? They went down into the mines of Modiar. But really, once you start Googling it, it turns out that Modiar is the Ministry of Defense industry of the state of Azerbaijan. And actually what they have is they're using the same bank ID or bank account as two other companies in the banking data. One called the Special State Protection Service, and the other one called the Special Medical Service of the People's Republic of Azerbaijan. So you can see here, these are all kind of entities that are using the same bank account number. And you can see here there's already a connection where Modiar has paid money into this company called Hilux Services. And what Hilux Services, it turns out to be, is a sort of important central flow point in this money laundering system. But I don't want to kind of click through here manually all the way, but I, again, want to use our fancy pathfinding tool. So what I'm going to say is, okay, so we have Modiar here. Can we tie it to a politically exposed person, right? Can we find any way in this graph of connecting Modiar to a politician? So this will take some thinking because the connection is not immediate. But again, what we're finding here is that there's payments going from Hilux Services to the bank account of, in this case, an individual called Eduard Lindner. Eduard Lindner turns out to be a German politician. And again, we have this tentative connection here, right? Where we have a bank account. You can see here there's a bank account detail. And we have this name node that's kind of creating this tentative connection between him and this entity, which is from Open Sanctions, that defines Eduard Lindner to be a politician. So we need some further information to pan this out. And the first thing we might do is to kind of go and see, all right, can we find Eduard Lindner in another database? So I'm actually going to open up the profile of Eduard Lindner here on Wikidata, which is a structured data version of Wikipedia. And all the way down here, what we'll get is a link to Wikipedia, right? So we'll now be able to call up the Wikipedia page of this politician. And already we might see some interesting things here. I apologize for those of you that find German extremely frustrating, but we can see that he is the founder of a company called the Society for the Support of German-Azerbaijani Relations. And so we can see already that the idea that Eduard Lindner might be linked to payments made by the Azerbaijani state and its institutions is not entirely out of this world, right? And then we can go and do further reporting, pan this out, and see, okay, this is actually a valid connection. By the way, I'm not saying anything new here. This has been reported fairly widely. We can even go one more time here and say, are there any other PEPs that connect to, for example, Helix services? And now this is going to think for quite a while, because there are so many different payments in the system. But eventually, if we're lucky, it will pop up a whole set of possible hypotheses for further entities that we might want to investigate in the same way that we've just seen Mr. Lindner being connected. So let's give this a second. Actually, while this is loading, what I might already show is, so we've done this kind of ad hoc investigation, but really what we want to do is be more systematic about this. Really, what we've kind of looked at is we've looked at these individual cases where we sort of get lucky, but we want to make systemic kind of connections, right? So, for example, one thing that we can do by just throwing together these data sets is to say, hey, let's define essentially a pattern, a graph that finds any connections from a sanctioned entity to a payment. This is kind of a language called Cypher that's used to kind of define connections in a network. So it's saying, find me any connection between a sanctioned entity and a payment. That's not an address, right? Just kind of having two entities at the same address is not enough information for me to kind of really act upon. And so if I click on that, this is what's called an alert in Linkurious. So it's kind of try to find all the instances of this pattern reoccurring, right? And so this is, I think, really interesting in the sense that it can allow you to really live out your creativity and saying, what are all the patterns I can think of that would be interesting to an investigator, and then basically work through the instances of these. So here, for example, we have a whole number of these results. I've limited at 300. So you can see, for example, here that there's a couple of companies that are linked to companies in the money laundering system via this company here called JSC Rosoboron Export, which is essentially the Russian state arms export company. And so we can kind of go through here and look at all these different possible connections that have been found. And again, what this is not evidence of anything, but it is a kind of tasking for a competent investigator to go and dig further into these connections and see what's happening here, and is any of this actually kind of worth, well, in my framing, worth a journalistic story, but also obviously worth a more in-depth financial crime investigation. We can obviously do the same thing with politically exposed people and payments. So, for example, here, what it's saying is these are all the potential links between individuals and who are on a PEPs list and the laundromat companies. I want to actually dive into one here just so you can see. Now we're pulling up essentially the connection that's been found tentatively, and so you can see here we have again one of the core entities of a laundromat. And one of the recipients of funds in there. And then we again have a name node, and we have here a PEP biography where we can see, okay, this is, for example, a former presidential candidate in Slovenia who also has been shown to be a recipient of funds from this money laundering system. And so in this case, for example, we could say this is a confirmed case. Yes?
Friedrich, can I ask you, where is this payment data coming from?
The payment data, you can ask, but I can't tell. This is data that comes from a journalistic source.
Gotcha.
So it's essentially, for journalists, obviously, we live in a world where we must rely on sources to provide us with really the good stuff, right? I think kind of as a general pattern, really good information always comes from combining these two types of data, right? The structural information about who's a PEP or who is sanctioned, how are they related, what companies do they own? That's sort of the explanatory data. But then you also need some activity data to actually say what's been happening in the world, right? Because without activity, none of this is really that interesting. Just being able to point out networks of hierarchy and an activity is not quite as interesting as being able to say, yes, this is actually this activity, this is happening here. There are politicians who are receiving monies from what is essentially Azerbaijani state authorities. And yeah, we can see here that there's quite a lot of different connections to work through. And so then it becomes a question of dividing labor and working through further external data sources to really pan out these links. Maybe let me dive into one more case here. I'm actually
we are over time, Friedrich. We are over time.
I apologize. Then
yeah,
wonderful.
No, that's my fault too.
I will hand it back then.
Yeah, we're 2 minutes over, and I'm fine with that, but I don't think everyone on our panel is able to stay. I want to stay for another hour or two, quite frankly. I just want to throw in, this has been awesome. I've learned a lot, and we have so many questions, but we can only get to a couple given the time for you two gentlemen. Edward asks, we are a financial intelligence unit that is currently using, I'm not going to say the name of the company because I don't know them, so we can't say it, to conduct all forms of OSINT analysis. Is there a way we can incorporate Linkurious within this company? I'm assuming he's asking API. Is there a way to have both systems working together and talking together within our internal systems?
So we do have clients that are incorporating our software into case management systems, for example, and we have an API that helps do that. So I'm not familiar with the software that you are referring to here, but I would say probably. Obviously, we need to talk specifics, but we do have an API, so it should be doable.
And both you gentlemen provide training on your platforms, correct? Because that's what Kamara is asking.
Yes, we actually are going to, we have some training modules, and we are actually going to launch the Linkurious Academy in the coming weeks.
Fantastic. All right, I think we only have time for one more. So there is a really good one here from Nabil. I really want to throw out here from Central Bank of Lebanon. He asked a really good question. To what extent can OSINT be misleading, and is it reliable to build an AML or CFT case? There's a lot of information there that you just put on there. How much do they take? How much can they just put in there reliably and then move on to the next case?
I think it comes down to a sort of a media literacy of understanding the taxonomy of sources that you might be able to access, right? There's data sources that I would consider still being OSINT that are government sources, right? And then the question is sort of, okay, we have this from a court record, or we have this from an official company's registry, at which point I would treat it as being reliable. But sometimes you do, I think, want to taste the forbidden fruit and pull in information that's from a leaked data set or from an informal source as well, not in order to prove anything, but just in terms of seeing what if these people were right? And then often it comes down to a matter of parallel construction, saying like, okay, now that I have this lead, can I find other kind of more reliable, more trustworthy information online, or from doing more targeted research in companies' archives, for example, to really pan out that lead independently.
That's fantastic. What do you think, Jean?
I do know that FIUs and tax agencies throughout the world are not shy with using this type of open source intelligence. For example, the Panama Papers data has helped them recoup hundreds of millions of in tax fraud. So it's definitely something to keep in mind.
I want to get to all of these questions, but we just can't right now. We're 5 minutes over. I know that you two have to go because of your day job. The questions that have come in, I will definitely be sharing them with our panelists here. If you, our members and non-members, have opted in to receive further communication from us or from our affiliate sponsors, then you will be able to get a follow-up email, and you can continue your conversation offline, which I think is great. If you opt out, then we will definitely honor that request and that decision, and we will not be able to contact you. At the end of this webinar, there is a survey, so please let us know if you want us to contact you and to speak further. A lot of really good questions. There's knowledge graph questions in there, John, that people want to know about. And so if you opt in, you can continue the conversation offline. Thank you so very much to our panelists, Sean and Friedrich. I apologize I had to cut you off, Friedrich, because I wanted to see the next case study, and that was on me because I talked too much in the beginning. But we will have to have another webinar with the two of you and myself as well, with me shutting up. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming and for participating in our webinar this morning.
Thank you so much for setting this up.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.